Hello, my friends. I am back, and we are going to keep reading The City of Ember. So, when we last read, Dune and Lena were running from the guards because the guards were kind of in on the mayor's plot, and Lena was almost getting caught, and Dune was watching from the window. So, we are going to pick back up with chapter 16, and I'm just going to warn you today's video might be a little bit long. I'm not sure. We're going to read chapters 16 and 17, and I just looked, and it's kind of more pages than I thought it was going to be, but it's all good. We will see. So chapter 16, the singing. When Lena heard the guards shout, terror shot through her. She ran faster than she ever had before, her heart pounding wildly. Behind her, the guards kept up their shouting, and she knew that if other guards were nearby, they would come running. She had to find a hiding place. Ahead of her was Bilbolio Square. Was there a spot she could duck into? And like an answer, Dune's words came back to her. The library, it's almost always open, even on holidays. She didn't have time to think. She didn't ask herself whether Edward Pocket would be willing to hide her, or whether there would even be a good place to hide in the library. She just ran for the passageway that led to the library door and darted down it. But the library door wouldn't open. She turned the knob frantically. She pulled and pushed, and then, at the same time that she heard running footsteps of the guards coming into the square, she saw the small, handwritten sign stuck to the door. Closed for the singing. The guards were very near now. If she ran, they would see her. She flattened herself against the wall, hoping they wouldn't think to look in the library passage. But they did. Here she is, yelled one of the guards. She tried to shoot past him, but the passage was too narrow, and he caught her by the arm. She pulled and twisted and kicked, but the chief guard had her now, too. He gripped her other arm with fingers that felt like iron. Stop your struggling, he shouted. Lena reached up and grabbed a handful of his wiry beard. She pulled with all her might, and the chief guard roared, but he didn't let go. He yanked her forward, almost off the ground, and the two guards dragged her across the square at an awkward, lopsided pace that made her stumble over her own feet. You're hurting me, Lena said. Don't hold so tight. Don't you tell us what to do, said the chief guard. We'll hold you tight till we get to where you're going. Where is that, said Lena. She was so enraged at her bad luck that she almost forgot to be afraid. You're going to see the mayor, missy, said the chief guard. He'll decide what to do with you. But I haven't done anything wrong. Spreading vicious rumors, said the guard, telling dangerous lies calculated to cause civic unrest. It's not a lie, she said, but the guard gripped her arm even more tightly and gave her a shove so she stumbled sideways. No talking, he said, and they walked the rest of the way in grim silence. A few people had already gathered in Harkin Square, though the workers were still getting it ready for the singing. Street sweepers crossed the square back and forth, pushing their brooms. Someone appeared at the second-floor window of a building on Gilly Street and unfurled one of the banners that was always displayed for the singing, a long piece of red cloth, faded after years of use, but still showing its design of wavy lines, representing the river, the source of all power. That was for the Song of the River. There would be a banner on the Broad Street side of the square, too, this one deep yellow gold with a design like a grid to represent the Song of the City, and another banner on the Otterville side for the Song of Darkness, perfectly black except for a narrow yellow edge. The guards marched Lena up the steps of the gathering hall and through the wide doorway. They took her down the main corridor, opened the door at the end, and gave her one last push, a push that caused her to stagger forward in an undignified way and bump up against the back of the chair. It was the same room she'd been in that other much happier day, her first day as a messenger. Nothing had changed. The frayed red curtains, the armchairs with the upholstery worn thin, the hideous mud-colored carpet. The portraits on the wall looked down at her sorrowfully. Sit there, said the chief guard. He pointed at a small, hard-looking chair that faced the large armchair. Lena sat. Next to the chair was a small table she remembered from before, with the china teapot and a tray of china teacups with chips around their edges. The chief guard left the room, to find the mayor, Lena supposed. The other one stood silently with his arms folded across his chest. Nothing happened for a while. Lena tried to think about what she would say to the mayor, but her mind wouldn't work. Then, the door to the front hall opened, and the mayor came in. It was the first time Lena had seen him up close since she had delivered Looper's message to him. He seemed even more immense. His baggy face was the color of a mushroom. He wore a black suit that stretched only far enough across his vast belly for one button to connect with its buttonhole. He moved ponderously across the room and settled into the armchair, filling it completely. Next to his chair was a table, and on the table was a brass bell the size of a fist. The mayor gazed for a moment at Lena with eyes that looked like the openings of tunnels, and then he turned to the guard. Dismissed, he said, waving the back of his hand at him. Return when I ring the bell. The guard left. The mayor swung his gaze back to Lena. I'm not surprised, he said. He lifted one arm and pointed a finger at Lena's face. You have been in trouble before, going where you shouldn't. Lena started to speak, but the mayor held up his hand. It was an oddly small hand with short fingers like ripe pea pods. Curiosity, said the mayor, a dangerous quality. Unhealthy. especially regrettable in one so young. I'm 12, said Lena. Silence, said the mayor. I am speaking. He wriggled slightly from side to side, wedging himself more firmly into the chair. Ember, as you know, the mayor went on, is in a time of difficulty. Extraordinary measures are necessary. This is a time when citizens should be most loyal, most law-abiding, for the good of all. Lena said nothing. She watched how the flesh under the mayor's chin bulged in and out as he spoke, and then she turned her eyes from this unpleasant sight and looked carefully around the room. She was thinking now, calculating, but not about what the mayor was saying. The duties of a mayor, said the mayor, are complex, cannot be understood by regular citizens, particularly children. That is why, he went on, leaning slightly forward so his stomach pushed farther out along his lap. Certain things must remain hidden from the public. The public would not understand. The public must have faith, said the mayor, once again holding up his hand, this time with a finger pointing to the ceiling, that all is being done for their benefit, for their own good. Hogwash, said Lena. The mayor jerked backward. His eyebrows came down over his eyes, making them into dark slits. What? He said. Surely I heard you incorrectly. I said hogwash, said Lena. It means, do not presume to tell me what it means, the mayor cried. Impudence will make things worse for you. He was breathing heavily, and his words came out with spaces between them. A misguided child, such as yourself, requires a forceful lesson. His short fingers gripped the arms of the chair. Perhaps, he said, your curiosity has led you to wonder about the prison room. What could it be like, eh? Dark, cold, uncomfortable? He made the smile that Lena remembered from assignment day. His lips pulled away from his small teeth, his gray cheeks folded. You will have the chance to find out. You will become closely acquainted with the prison room. The guards will escort you there. Your accomplice, another known troublemaker, will join you as soon as he is located. The mayor turned to look for the bell. This was the moment when Lena had planned to make a dash for freedom. She thought she had a slim chance to succeed if she moved fast enough, but something happened in that instant that gave her a head start. The lights went out. There was no flicker this time, just a sudden, complete darkness. It was fortunate that Lena had already planned her move and knew exactly which way to go. She leapt up, knocking over her chair. With her arm, she made a wide swipe and knocked over the table next to the chair as well. The furniture thumping to the floor, the teapot shattering, and the mayor's enraged shouts made the clamor that covered the sound of her footsteps as she dashed to the stairway door. Was it unlocked? She reached for the knob. Grunts and squeaks told her the mayor was struggling to rise from his chair. She turned the knob and pulled, and the door sprang open. She closed the door behind her and leapt upward 2 steps at a time. Even in the pitch dark, she could climb stairs. In the room, the bell clanged, and the mayor bellowed. When she got to the first landing, she heard the guards shouting. There was a crash. Someone must have fallen over the toppled chair or table. Where is she? Someone yelled. Must have run out the door. Did they know which door? She didn't hear footsteps behind her. If she could make it to the roof, and if from the roof she could jump to the roof of the prison room, and from there to the street, then maybe she could escape. Her lungs were on fire now. Her breath was burning her throat, but she climbed without stopping, and when she came to the top, she burst through the door to the roof and ran out. And that was when the lights came back on. It was as if the blackout had been arranged especially for her. I'm so lucky, she thought, so extremely lucky. Ahead of her was the clock tower. She went around to the other side of it. No dancing on the roof this time. A low wall ran along the edge of the building. Lena approached it cautiously and peered out over the swarm of people assembling in Harkin Square. Directly below her was the entrance of the gathering hall, and as she watched, 2 guards dashed out the door and down the steps. Good, they had gone the wrong way. They must think she'd escaped into the crowd. For the moment, she was safe. The clock in the tower began to chime. 3 great booms rang out. It was time for the singing to begin. Lena gazed down at the people of Ember, gathered to sing their songs. They stood so close together that she could see only their faces, which were lifted up toward the sky, with the hard bright light shining down on them. They were silent, waiting for the songmaster to appear on the gathering hall steps. There was a strange hush, as if the city were holding its breath. Of the whole Ember year, Lena thought, this hush before the singing was one of the most exciting moments. She remembered other years when she had stood with her parents, too short to see the songmaster's signal, too short to see anything but people's backs and legs, and waited for the first note to thunder out. She felt her heart move at that moment every year. The sound would rise in waves around her like water, almost as if it could lift her off the ground. Now suddenly the moment came again. From hundreds of voices rose the first notes of the song of the city, deep and strong. She felt as she had all the years before, a quivering inside, as though a string under her ribs had been plucked, and a rush of joy and sadness mixed together. The deep, rumbling chords of the song filled Harkin Square. Lena felt she might step off the edge of the building and walk across the air. It seemed so solid with sound. The song of the city was long. There were verses about streets of light and walls of stone, about citizens with sturdy hearts, about stored abundance never ending. Not true, Lena thought. But at last, the song of the city wound down to its end. The singers held the final note, which grew softer and softer, and then there was silence again. Lena looked out at the lighted streets spreading away in every direction, the street she knew so well. She loved her city, worn out and crumbling though it was. She looked up at the clock. 10 minutes after 3. Dune would be getting ready to leave for the pipeworks. She didn't know whether he'd seen her being captured. If he had, he would be wondering if she'd been locked into the prison room. He'd be wondering if he should try to rescue her, or if he should go down the river by himself. She should be hurrying to join him, but a sadness held her back, like a heavy stone in her chest. She bent her face into the palms of her hands and pressed hard against her closed eyes. How could she go away from Ember and leave Poppy behind? Because if she went, she must leave Poppy behind, mustn't she? How could she take her on a journey of such danger? The song of the river startled her when it began, the men's voices low and rolling, swelling with power, and then the women's voices coming in above with a complicated melody that seemed to fight the current. Lena listened, unable to move. The song of the river made her uneasy. It always had. With its rolling, relentless rhythm, it seemed to urge her onward, saying, "Go down, go away, go now." The more she listened, the more she felt something like the motion of the river in her stomach, a churning, sickening feeling. Then came the song of darkness, the last of the 3 songs, the one most filled with longing and majesty. The soul of Ember was in this song. Its tremendous chords held all the sorrow and all the strength of the people of the city. The song reached its climax, darkness like an endless night, sang the hundreds of voices, so powerfully the air seemed to shiver. And at that moment, the lights, once more, went out. The voices faltered, but only for an instant. Then they rose again in the darkness, stronger even than before. Lena sang too. She stood up and sang with all her might into the deep, solid blackness. The last notes echoed and faded into a terrible silence. Lena stood utterly still. Will it end like this, she thought, at the finish of the last song? She felt the cold stone of the clock tower behind her back. She waited. Then an idea came to her that made her skin prickle. What if she were to say, "Listen, people, we found the way out of Ember. It's the river. We go on the river." She could announce the astounding news, just as she and Dune had planned to do, and then what would happen? Would the guards rush up to the roof and seize her? Would the people in the square think her news was just a child's wishful thinking? Or would they listen and be saved? She could feel the words pushing upward in her throat. She wanted so much to say them. She took a deep breath and leaned forward. But before she could speak, a rumble of voices arose below. Someone shouted, "Don't move!" and someone else shrieked. The rumble rose to a roar, and then cries flew into the darkness from everywhere. The crowd was erupting into panic. There was no hope of being heard now. Lena clutched the edge of the clock tower as if the tumult below might cause her to fall. She strained her eyes against the darkness. Without light, she could go nowhere. "Lights, come back on," she prayed. "Come back on." Then she saw something. At first, she thought her eyes were tricking her. She closed them tightly and opened them again. It was still there, a tiny point of light, moving. As she watched, it moved along slowly in a straight line. Then it turned and moved in a straight line again. Was it on River Road? She couldn't tell. But suddenly, she knew what it was. It was Dune with a candle. Dune going toward the pipeworks in the dark. And she wanted to go too. She could feel it all through her, the urge to run and meet him and find the way out of Ember to the new place. She listened to the shouts and wails that terrified people in the square below. She thought of Mrs. Murdo, down there in the dark, being bumped and pushed, with her arms wrapped tightly around Poppy, trying to protect her, and all at once, everything seemed clear. Lena knew what she would do. If only the lights would come back on. If only this was not the very last blackout in the history of Ember. Watching the tiny light following its steady course, she made a wish with the whole force of her heart and mind. Then the floodlights flickered. There was a great cry of hope from the crowd, and the lights came on and stayed on. Lena ran to the back edge of the roof, dropped easily down onto the roof of the prison room, and, seeing no guards in the crowd that was now streaming into the street, she jumped from there to the ground and joined the throng of people. She made her way down Greystone Street, going at the same pace as everyone else so she wouldn't stand out. When she came to the trash can enclosure behind the gathering hall, she squatted down and hid. Her heart was beating fast, but she felt strong and purposeful now. She had her plan. As soon as she spotted Mrs. Murdo and Poppy on their way home, she'd put it into action. Chapter 17. Away. At 3:20, Dune took his pillowcase pack, left the school by the back door, and started up Pibb Street. He went fast. The lights had gone out for a few minutes just before 3, and he was nervous about being outside. He planned to take the long way to the pipeworks, out at the very edge of the city, to avoid any guards that might still be looking for him. He was filled with dread about Lena. He wouldn't know what had happened to her until he got to the pipeworks, and she either showed up or didn't. All he could do now was run. He raced down Knack Street. It was strange to be out in the city with the streets so utterly deserted. Without the people passing back and forth, the street seemed wider and darker. Nothing moved but himself, his shadow, and his fleeting reflection in shop windows he passed. In Salverton Square, he saw a kiosk where the poster with his and Lena's names on it had been pinned up. Everyone in the city now must have seen these posters. He was famous, he thought wryly, but not in the way he had wanted. There would be no glorious moment on the Gathering Hall steps after all. Instead of making his father proud, he would cause him dreadful worry. This thought made him so sad that his knees felt suddenly wobbly. How could he just vanish without a word? But it was too late now. He couldn't go back. If only there was some way to send him a message. And in a moment, he realized there was. He stopped, fished in his pack for the paper and pencil he'd brought, and scribbled on it. "Father, we have found the way out. It was in the pipeworks after all. You will know about it tomorrow. Love, Dune." He folded this in quarters, wrote "Deliver to Loris Harrow" in big letters on the outside, and pinned it to the kiosk. There, that was the best he could do. He would have to trust that someone would deliver it. In the distance, he heard the faint sound of the singing. He listened. It was the song of the river just ending. Far below, like the blood of the earth, from the center of nowhere rushing forth, he sang under his breath. Like everyone in Ember, he knew the words of the 3 songs by heart. He sang along softly with the faraway singers. "Making the light for the lamps of Ember, older than anyone can remember, faster than anything anyone knows, the river comes and the river goes." Up Rim Street, now to River Road. He was halfway there. The singers were starting on the Song of Darkness. It was his favorite, with the powerful, deep harmonies. He was a little sorry to be missing it. He went up to the Pot Street side of empty River Road Square, where another poster hung crookedly on the kiosk, and he was headed toward North Street when suddenly the lights flickered and went out. He jolted to a stop. Stand still and wait. That was his automatic response. In the distance, he heard a dip in the sound of the singing, some startled voices breaking the flow, but then the song rose again, defying the darkness. For a moment, all thoughts vanished from Dune's mind. There was nothing but the fearless words of the song. Black as sleep and deep as dreaming, darkness like an endless night, yet within the streets of Ember, bright and bravely shines our light. He sang, standing still in the blackness. When the song ended, he waited. The lights would surely come back soon. For a few minutes, there was silence, and then, far away, but piercingly clear, he heard a scream. More screams and shouts followed, the sounds of panic. He felt the panic himself, like a hand taking hold of him, making him want to leap up and fling himself against the dark. But suddenly, with a flash of joy, he remembered. He didn't have to wait for the lights to come back on. He had what no citizen of Ember had ever had before, a way to see in the dark. He set his pack down, untied the knot at the top, and groped around inside until he felt the candle. Down in a corner, he found a little packet of matches. He scraped a match against the pavement, and it flared up instantly. He held the flame to the string on the candle, and the string began to burn. He had a light. He had the only light in the entire city. The candle didn't cast its light very far, but it was enough to see at least the pavement in front of him. He went slowly along Pot Street, then turned left on North Street. At the end of the street was the wall of the Pipeworks office. When he got to the Pipeworks entrance, no one was there. A little cloud of moths came to flutter around the flame of his candle, but otherwise nothing moved in Plummer Square. There was nothing to do but wait. Dune blew the candle out. He didn't want to use it all up in case the lights stayed off a long time, and squatted down on the pavement, setting down his bundle and leaning against one of the big trash cans. He waited, listening to the distant shouts, and at last the lights blinked again, and came on. Lena was nowhere in sight. If the guards had found her and taken her, but Dune preferred not to think about that yet. He would wait for a while. She would have been delayed by the blackout if she was on her way. He couldn't see the clock tower from here, but it was probably not quite 4 o'clock. What if she didn't come? The singing was over, the people were dispersing throughout the city, and the guards, no doubt, would soon resume their search for him. Dune clasped his arms together and pressed them hard against his stomach, trying to stop the queasy fluttering. If she didn't come, Dune had 2 choices. He could stay in the city and do what he could to save Lena, or he could go in the boat by himself and hope Lena could somehow free herself and tell the people of Ember about the way out. He didn't like either of those plans. He wanted to go down the river, and he wanted to go with Lena. Dune stood up and hoisted his sack again. He was too restless to keep sitting. He walked down to Gappery Street and looked in both directions. Not a single person was in sight. He walked to Plummer Street, thinking that perhaps Lena was coming by way of the city's edge, as he had, to avoid being seen. But no one was there. He didn't even see anyone when he went past Subling Street to the very end of the city. He had to decide what to do. He went and stood in the doorway of the pipeworks. Think, he said to himself, think. He was not even sure he could make the river journey by himself. How would he get the boat into the water? Could he lift it without help? On the other hand, how could he help Lena if she was in the hands of the mayor's guards? What could he possibly do that would not just get himself caught too? He felt sick. His hands were cold. He stepped out of the doorway and scanned the square once again. Nothing moved but the moths around the lights. And then, down Gappery Street, Lena came running. She came slantwise across the square, and he dashed to meet her. She was hugging a bundle to her chest. I've come. I'm here. I almost didn't make it, she said, breathing so hard she could barely talk. And look. She folded back the blanket of her bundle. Dune saw a curl of brown hair and two wide, frightened eyes. I've brought Poppy. Dune was so glad to see Lena that he didn't mind at all that Poppy was coming with them, making a risky journey even riskier. Relief and excitement flooded through him. They were going. Okay, he said, come on. With his borrowed key, he opened the pipeworks door, and they hurried past the yellow slickers on the hooks and the lines of rubber boots. Dune dashed into the pipeworks office long enough to replace the key on its hook, and then they pulled open the stairway door and started down. Lena stepped slowly because of Poppy, and Poppy clung to her neck, unusually quiet, sensing the strangeness and importance of what was happening. At the bottom of the stairs, they came out into the main tunnel and walked down the path to the west until they made it to the marked rock. How are we going to get Poppy down there? Dune asked. Lena said, I'll fasten her to my chest. Setting Poppy down, Lena took off the coat and the sweater she was wearing. With Dune's help, she made her sweater into a sling for Poppy, tying its sleeves behind her neck. Then she put her coat back on and buttoned it up. Dune looked doubtfully at this bulky arrangement. Will you be able to climb down carrying her like that? Will you be able to reach around her and hold on to the rungs? Yes, said Lena. Now that she had Poppy with her, she felt brave again. She could do whatever she needed to. Dune went down first. Lena followed. Stay very still, Poppy, she said. Don't squirm. Poppy did stay still, but even so, it was not easy going down the ladder with her extra weight. Lena's arms were just long enough to reach past Poppy and hold on to the ladder. She descended very slowly. When she got to the ledge, she stepped sideways, gripped the hand Dune held out for her, and, with a deep breath of relief, came into the entryway. They walked to the back of the entry hall, and Dune opened the steel panel and took out the key. He slid aside the door to the room where the single boat was, and they went in. Dune took his candle from the sack and lit it. Lena unwrapped Poppy and sat her down at the back of the room. Don't move from there, she said. Poppy put her thumb in her mouth, and Dune and Lena set to work. Dune's sack went in the pointed end of the boat, which they decided must be the front. They put the box of candles and matches into the rear of the boat. It was clear they'd been designed to go there. They fit snugly. The poles labeled paddles were a mystery. Lena thought maybe they were weapons meant for fending off hostile creatures. Dune thought they might fit across the boat somehow to make railings to brace yourself against, but he couldn't get them to work in this way. Finally, they decided just to leave the paddles in the bottom of the boat and figured out what they were for as they went along. Dune dripped a bit of wax on the floor and stood his candle up in it so he'd have both hands free. Let's see if we can lift the boat, he said. With Dune at the rear and Lena at the front, they found they could lift the boat with ease. It was amazingly light, even with the boxes and pack inside it. They set it down again. The next step was to get it into the water somehow, and then get them in themselves. We can't just drop it in, Lena said. The river would grab it right away. That must be what the ropes are for, said Dune. We lower it by holding onto the ropes, and tie the ropes to something to keep it from moving. To what? They must have put a peg or something in the wall to tie it to. Dune went back out to the edge of the river and got down on his knees. Leaning over, he felt with one hand along the bank below. At first, there was only smooth, slippery rock. He moved his hand slowly back and forth, up and down. River water splashed against his fingers. At last, he felt something, a metal rod attached to the river wall, like the rungs of the ladder they had climbed down. I found it, he called. He got up again and went back to the boat room. Let's carry the boat out, he said. He and Lena lifted it, and taking small steps, moved it forward. As they went out the door, Poppy began to wail. Don't cry, Lena called to her. Stay right there. We'll be back in a second. They carried the boat right to the edge of the water and set it down carefully, its front end pointing downstream. Dune knelt again, feeling for the metal rod. Hand me the end of the rope, he said. Which rope? Lena thought for a second. She realized it had to be the one attached to the side of the boat nearest her. That would be the side closest to the riverbank when they put the boat in. She uncoiled the rope, ran it around the boat, and handed its end down to Dune, who lay on his stomach with his head hanging over the edge and knotted the rope to the metal rung in the wall. He got to his feet again, wiping water from his face. Now, Dune said, we can put the boat in the water. Another wail came from the boat room. I'm coming, Lena called and dashed back for Poppy. She hoisted her up and spoke into her ear in the voice she used for announcing an exciting game. We're going on an adventure, Poppy. We're going for a ride in the water. It'll be fun, you'll see. She blew out the candle Dune had left and carried Poppy to the river's edge. Are we ready? Said Dune. I guess we are. Goodbye to Ember, Lena thought. Goodbye to everyone. Goodbye to everything. For a second, a picture of herself arriving in the bright city of her dreams flashed into her mind, and then it faded and was gone. She had no idea what lay ahead. She set Poppy down against the wall of the entry passage. Sit here, she told her. Don't move until I tell you to. Poppy sat, her eyes wide, her plump legs sticking out in front of her. Lena took hold of the rope at the rear of the boat. Dune took hold of the rope at the front. They heaved the boat up and stretched it sideways to swing it out over the water. It tipped alarmingly from side to side. Let it down, yelled Lena. They both let the rope slide through their hands, and the boat fell and hit the water with a slap. It bounced and rocked and pulled against its tether, but Dune's knot held. The boat stayed in place, waiting for them. Here I go, Dune cried. He bent over, gripped the rim of the boat with one hand, turned backward, and stepped in. The boat tipped sideways under his weight. Dune staggered a step, and then found his balance. All right, he yelled. Hand me Poppy. Lena lifted Poppy, who began to howl and kick at the sight of the bucking boat in the churning water. But Dune's arms were right there, and Lena thrust her into them. A second later, she jumped in herself, and then all three of them were tossed to the floor of the boat by its violent rocking. Dune managed to get to his feet. He hauled on the rope that held the boat to the bank until he was close enough to reach the knot. He struggled with it. Water splashed into his face. He yanked at the knot, loosened it, pulled the rope free, and the boat shot forward. So that's where we're going to leave it for today. And I cannot wait to read with you guys what is going to happen next. All right, so we've only got just a little bit of the book left, and they are about to head down the river. So I cannot wait. Make sure you stay tuned for tomorrow's video so we can keep going and see what happens. Bye, guys.